Hey guys, welcome back to another wonderful chapter summary and unpacking. We are now on chapter 23 of To Kill a Mockingbird. So this chapter is really interesting because it goes into the levels of Maycomb, as I like to call them. So there's this idea that there are different classes in society. You know, like in America, we have the lower class, the upper class, and the middle class, right? Depending on your wealth and your income status. But in Maycomb and in literature, there are things other than wealth that can define you. So in Maycomb, there are the people that founded Maycomb are considered much more of a high esteem than the people that are in lower levels of Maycomb, right? So like, for example, the founding families, the Finches descended from the Finches of Finch's Landing. So their Atticus and his family are held in a much higher regard than someone like the Yules or the Cunninghams, who really don't contribute very much to the society or like to the community. Whereas like Atticus and his family, as Atticus is a lawyer and his family are descendants of those who founded the town. Of course, the founders, like they had a really big deal of like what they did in the town because if they founded it, they did something to help them out, right? It always makes me think of things like Vampire Diaries and like things in literature or in TV shows. Whenever it takes place in a small town, there's always a very big emphasis that is placed on the founders of the town, and that's because that's where the history comes from, and that's where the entire town wouldn't exist without them. So there's this sort of idea of like where you come from defines who you are now. Like your past defines your present, and your present defines your future. So because there's such a class system in Maycomb, then you consider like who you hold in such a high degree of like how much you respect someone is how much their word is worth, right? So is one person's word worth more than the others? So when they're talking about like Atticus is talking to Scout and Jem about the trial and the aftermath, and like in the previous chapter we had talked about, here, let's go back real quick. Here we go. Can we judge them as a community because of the trial and things like that? Like whether you can look at Maycomb as a community or as individuals. In this chapter, you could honestly argue that they are defined by what level that they're in. So there's this idea of the social class hierarchy. And at the top, as I was saying, there's the family with hereditary links, the original settlers of Maycomb County. So like Finch's Landing is in Maycomb County. The Finches are held in a higher regard. Then there's the farmers and the professionals. So like the Finches, depending on who in the town they're looking at them, they'll either view them with the farmers and professionals or the ones with the hereditary links. They're like right there at the top of the pyramid though, either way. Then we've got the Yules level of society, which is like the disgrace of Maycomb. So the Cunninghams are kind of like, they're not quite at the Yules level, but they're not quite at the farmers and professional level either, because they've really lost everything in their farm and the depression's really hit everyone hard, right? So then we have the disgrace Maycomb, and then down at the bottom, we have the minorities and the Jim Crow laws and racist society. So this story takes place in the 1930s, and we talked about like the trial and how he was found guilty. And if you were in the Zoom meeting, you'll remember we talked about how it wasn't even really a trial of his peers, because Tom Robinson, as a Black man, couldn't really have Black people on the jury because they weren't allowed to until a court case in the state of Alabama, actually, same state that the book takes place in, legalized it in 1963. Or 1933, sorry. So it wasn't even until like right around the time of the trial where they even allowed to be on a jury. So it wasn't exactly these people, these that are down here at the bottom. Here, let me turn on my pointer so I can, like it wasn't even these people, oops, that are here, that are down here, that are the minorities of Maycomb. The people that were judging him are the farmers and professionals, the families with hereditary links, and the Yules level of society, right? They're looking down on him. So here we have the Yules who are coming to trial against Tom Robinson, right? And then there's this really good quote Somewhere I had received the impression that fine folks were people who did the best they could with what sense they had. But Aunt Alexandria was of the opinion that the longer a family had been squatting on one path of land, the finer it was. Right? So in this chapter, we have Aunt Alexandria talking with Atticus and them, and they're talking about how Cunningham was actually the one on the trial, or on the jury, sorry, that had wanted to acquit Tom, but Aunt Alexandria calls the family trash, right? So they're of this lower level of society judging those lower to them, right? So one judges the other who judges the other. So it's this hierarchy that comes down of just disdain. So throughout the novel, we've seen a lot of families in Macomb. So like I've discussed, like, are they being treated equally? Like you can submit through email an extra credit assignment if you'd like, stating whether you think they're equal or not. And just think about it this way in terms of the trial, like there's this idea of the power is all up here and it's trickling down to the others. So the farmers and professionals look down on the Yule level of society, so they gain their power back by looking back at the minorities, right? So in the Zoom meeting, we talked about the idea of the lawyer for the state, so arguing that Tom Robinson was guilty. And the linchpin of his whole argument was that Tom Robinson felt like sad and felt like sorry for Mayella. And this idea that someone from higher up in the pyramid felt bad, like someone down here feeling bad for someone up here, it was laughable. It was a criminal offense, right? So just like how we had talked about in the pre-readings with the Jim Crow laws about the idea of like which states thought what, and how it is that they tried and just like things like that a teacher teaching a mixed race classroom would be in trouble, not the students, right? So it's this idea of how the racism is played out, and this idea of like, you're down here, you have no right to feel bad for us up here because we're so privileged. This idea of the mixing of the races and that the pity is trickling upwards instead of downwards was like unacceptable to the lawyer, right? And just with Alexandria too, this idea that I've been here the longest, therefore I have the right to it. All right. And that's about it for this video. I think we've gone over a lot in terms to think about, you know, definitely in terms of is one man's word worth more than the others? Would you guys consider someone who's down here with the minorities or the Yule level society to have a word or an input that is just as valuable as the farmers and professionals or the people that originally settled Macomb County? Or do you say, no, these people are uneducated, like I don't support them at all? Or yes, of course, everyone's worth, like words are worth things and valuable. Feel free to shoot me an email with extra credit for that. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and I'll see you next time.